Mr. Chong, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to move a motion, and then I will speak to the motion. So I will begin by presenting my motion.
That in light of the February 28th, 2024 tabling of the Winnipeg Lab documents, which contained the government's own findings, concluding that the People's Republic of China and its entities infiltrated Canada's top microbiology lab, a national security breach representing a very serious and credible threat to Canada. And given that access to this information had been denied to Parliament and all Canadians by the government for several years, the committee undertake a study pursuant to Standing Orders 108, 3, H, 6, and 7 of the collection and transmission of information and intelligence within the Government of Canada, and the government's reliance on its overclassification to deny access to it by Parliament and Canadians, provided that the committee report its findings to the House and call the following witnesses to appear. A, the Departmental Security Officer, Executive Director of Security, Public Health Agency of Canada, the Deputy Minister of Health, Dr. Stephen Lucas, the Vice President, Infectious Diseases Branch, Public Health Agency of Canada, Dr. Donald Shepard, the Vice President, National Microbiology Laboratory Branch, Public Health Agency of Canada, Dr. Guillaume Poliquin, the President of the Public Health Agency of Canada, Heather Jeffrey, the Minister of Health, the Honourable Mark Holland, the Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, David Vigneault, the Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, Nathalie Drouin, and the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, the Honourable Dominic Leblanc. Mr. Chair, I'd like to give a brief couple of minutes of remarks on this motion so that all members...
Thank you, Mr. Chong. Before you go ahead, the motion is in order, and my understanding is that the clerk has shared the motion in both official languages with all members of the committee. Go ahead with your comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple minutes of remarks so that all members will have a say on this motion and we can get it to a vote in the time that we have. We finally, Mr. Chair, have the documents. In our view, this is the start of this matter, not the end. We are continuing off where we left 3 years ago when the Canada-China Committee asked for the Winnipeg Lab documents. And I believe that this committee has to conduct this work because the government has indicated, and Minister Holland specifically, that no one within PIAC is going to be held accountable and terminated for these lapses at the Winnipeg Lab. So I believe Parliament has a job to hold the government accountable. This is a grave and serious matter that requires a parliamentary to investigate. Dr. Chu clandestinely collaborated with the government and the military of the People's Republic of China and was paid by that same government and military of the People's Republic of China without the government of Canada knowing. These Winnipeg Lab breaches are part of a broader pattern by this government of neglecting Canada's national security. We not only have the Winnipeg Lab breaches, we have a neglect of sensitive areas of research at Canadian universities in the theft of intellectual property and the threat to national security that CSIS has now highlighted for almost a decade. We have the neglect of the PRC's foreign interference threat activities directed at democratic institutions like Parliament and at our democratic processes like our general elections, which has forced the government to call a public inquiry, which is ongoing. And in all of this, it's the Prime Minister, the head of government, that is responsible. There is a document, a PCO document, titled Open and Accountable Government. It is one of the founding documents of this current government. In that document, it is clear that the Prime Minister alone is responsible for the machinery of government, that the Prime Minister alone is responsible for how information and intelligence flows within the different entities of the Government of Canada, flows from services like the Canadian Security Intelligence Service to various departments and agencies of the government. That same document also makes it clear that the Prime Minister has a unique responsibility for national security. And so when we combine those two things together, we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to get to the bottom of this, because ultimately the Prime Minister is accountable to Parliament, as is the Ministry. And so the motion that is in front of us today is a substantive motion that is focused on examining two things that are within the mandate of the committee. First, the purpose of the motion in front of us is to examine the flow of information and intelligence within the Government of Canada, to examine why this information and intelligence did not catch the clandestine activities of Dr. Chu before September 2018, when it was discovered that Dr. Chu had improperly registered a patent produced from work as a government scientist in the People's Republic of China. To discover why Dr. Chu had not been discovered in the 2 previous years, in 2017 and 18, of having clandestinely met with entities within the People's Republic of China and clandestinely received payments from the government and the military of the People's Republic of China for that travel. The purpose of the motion in respect of examining the flow of intelligence within the Government of Canada is to also examine why it took 10 months for the government to secure the lab when it had been discovered that a patent had been improperly registered in the PRC and government policy violated. The patent violation was discovered in September of 2018, yet it took 10 months till July 5th of 2019 for the government to secure the lab. Despite the fact that in the early part of 2019, when Dr. Chu's computer was seized by government IT, and despite the fact that Dr. Chu in the early part of 2019 was denied approval for a trip to the PRC, she was still allowed to ship lethal Ebola and Henipaviruses viruses on March 31st of 2019 from the Winnipeg National Microbiology Laboratory to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We need to understand why information didn't flow more quickly to prevent that from happening. The second substantive examination that the motion proposes is to examine why the documents originally requested in 2021 were overclassified. Minister Holland has indicated in the House of Commons that the classification of the documents was PAC's responsibility alone. And so we need to understand why officials at the Public Health Agency of Canada incorrectly classified these documents and denied a parliamentary committee this information. And that's why, Mr. Chair, all of the witnesses, with the exception of 2 witnesses, exception of 3 witnesses, I should say, are witnesses that are from PIAC. That is why we're asking for the Departmental Security Officer to appear. It was that position that originally flagged the violation of government policy in the registration of a patent in the People's Republic of China. It's why we're calling other officials from PIAC to understand what broke down in transmitting information that a parliamentary committee had ordered 4 times to Parliament and its committees. I'll finish, Mr. Chair, by saying this. I really, truly believe that we have a job to do as parliamentarians in this committee to hold the government accountable. The government defied 4 orders of the House of Commons and its committee for these documents. We called the president of the Public Health Agency in front of Canada to condemn him for this defiance of this order and for refusing to hand over the documents. The government subsequently took the Speaker of the House of Commons to court and subsequently called an early election, which had the effect of dissolving the 4 orders. And after 3 long years, we finally have gotten access to the documents, and we need to continue this examination in order to hold the government accountable. We cannot let this defiance of Parliament that took place 3 years ago go unanswered and unexamined, and we cannot allow these national security breaches to go to continue. And that's why it's so important, I think, this committee adopts this motion, examines this matter, and I hope produces a report with recommendations to improve the government's performance in these matters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.